The biggest breast on the world belongs to someone, but the moment you hear that phrase your mind instantly reacts. Some people get curious, some laugh, some feel judgmental, some lean in with fascination, and that immediate reaction is exactly what reveals something powerful about human behavior. We live in a culture that has conditioned us to pay attention to the extremes. The biggest, the tallest, the richest, the most famous, the most outrageous. That's where our attention goes because we've been trained to believe that ordinary isn't enough. We've been trained to chase the headline instead of the truth, to value spectacle over substance, and to confuse being noticed with being valued. And when we hear about the biggest anything, whether it's the biggest house, the biggest paycheck, or the biggest breast in the world, what it does is expose how often we measure ourselves by someone else's yardstick instead of asking what actually matters to us. The obsession with extremes has become the background noise of our lives. Scroll through social media and what do you see? Comparison. People parading highlights of their lives, presenting the most filtered, exaggerated, perfected versions of reality. And you, without even realizing it, compare your real life to their curated moments and convince yourself you're falling behind. That's the trap. That's why a headline about the biggest breast catches attention, because it taps into this collective obsession with measurement, with size, with ranking. But the truth is, what's extreme rarely equals what's fulfilling. You can be the biggest in the world at something and still wake up feeling empty, still wrestle with insecurity, still not recognize yourself in the mirror. Think about how much energy people waste chasing the biggest or the best. Someone out there is fighting for the biggest promotion, the biggest house, the biggest circle of friends, the biggest audience. They are running in circles trying to expand outward when the real growth happens inward. And while they chase external validation, they lose touch with themselves. They forget that fulfillment doesn't come from being the biggest, it comes from being aligned. When you're aligned with your values, when you are doing what matters to you, when you're surrounded by people who actually see you for who you are, that is when you feel whole. The fascination with extremes is really about distraction. It's easier to stare at someone else's spectacle than to sit with your own reality. It's easier to gossip about the biggest body, the most expensive car, the largest following than it is to take responsibility for your own happiness. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Every single time you measure yourself against extremes, you shrink your own potential. You stop asking, what do I need? And start asking, how do I compare? That comparison is the thief of joy, and it's the reason so many people feel like they're never enough, no matter what they achieve. The biggest breast in the world belongs to someone, but it doesn't make them more valuable than anyone else. It doesn't make their life easier. It doesn't make their relationships deeper. What it does is prove that people will always look for something to point at, something to magnify, something to hold up as a spectacle. And yet none of that spectacle translates into confidence, into peace, into love, into joy. You don't need to be the biggest, the best, or the most to live an extraordinary life. You need presence. You need courage. You need the willingness to stop scrolling, stop comparing, stop idolizing extremes, and start asking yourself the harder question, what matters to me? Because if you don't answer that, if you don't define your own standard, then you'll spend your entire life chasing someone else's idea of success and never feel like you arrive. The biggest breast on the world belongs to someone, but what that statement really reveals is how our minds instantly latch onto extremes and exaggerations. It is human nature to be drawn to the biggest, the rarest, the most outrageous, and this conditioning starts early. From the time you were a kid, you were shown that being number one matters more than anything else. The best student, the fastest runner, the biggest trophy, the highest score. You were trained to believe that the only way to be valuable is to stand out in a way that no one else can. That mindset follows you into adulthood, and suddenly you find yourself living in a society where headlines are designed to shock, to grab, to make you compare. Someone out there is the richest, someone is the tallest, someone has the biggest breast, and the rest of us are told to measure our lives against theirs. This is the dangerous loop. Because the more you measure your worth against extremes, the more you convince yourself you are not enough. You think that because you're not the biggest, the brightest, the most followed, or the wealthiest, somehow you're falling short. That belief will drain your confidence, steal your energy, and keep you chasing a finish line that doesn't exist. When you build your value on external comparisons, you never win. Because there will always be someone who has more, someone who ranks higher, someone who takes the title. You cannot live a fulfilling life by measuring yourself through other people's extremes. What you can do, however, is shift your attention inward. You can remind yourself that your worth is not measured by the numbers on a screen, the size of your body, or the size of your bank account. Your worth is measured by how you show up in your own life. By the courage you bring into your relationships, by the consistency you bring into your work, by the resilience you show in the face of setbacks. The biggest breast in the world might grab a headline, but it doesn't guarantee that person is fulfilled. What guarantees fulfillment is the ability to know yourself, trust yourself, and stop shrinking your life by measuring it against the extremes of other people. The biggest breast on the world belongs to someone, but that idea highlights something deeper about how we chase attention and how our culture rewards spectacle over substance. We live in a time where the loudest gets noticed, the most exaggerated gets clicks, and the biggest always steals the spotlight. That cycle has made people believe that in order to be valued, they have to be seen. They have to be extreme. They have to shock or surprise in order to matter. The problem with that belief is that it disconnects you from yourself. It makes you think that who you are right now is somehow insufficient unless you enlarge it, exaggerate it, or perform it for others. That's why people obsess over numbers, over followers, over likes, over recognition. They mistake being watched for being worthy. The fascination with the biggest of anything is really a mirror of that obsession. When someone hears about the biggest breast in the world, they react not because it changes their lives but because it sparks a moment of comparison, of spectacle, of distraction. That's the same reaction people have when they see someone flaunt wealth or success online. They pause, they compare, they wonder where they fit in that equation. What's interesting is that this constant comparison robs people of their own joy. Because the moment you start measuring your happiness by someone else's extreme, you set yourself up to feel small. It is impossible to live in peace when you are constantly stacking your reality against the highlight reels of others. You think to yourself, I don't have the biggest anything, so maybe I'm not enough. You forget that the measure of your life has never been about scale, it has always been about depth. It's not about the size of what you own, it's about the meaning behind it. It's not about the magnitude of attention you receive, it's about the authenticity of the relationships you build. It's not about the biggest achievement that the world notices, it's about the daily choices you make that no one else sees. The culture may be obsessed with the extremes, but fulfillment is found in the ordinary. The person who is consistent, the person who is grounded, the person who is real, that's the person who thrives in the long run. So every time you find yourself drawn toward the biggest or the most, ask yourself if that pursuit actually matters to you. Because if it doesn't, you're only distracting yourself from the real work of becoming the person you want to be. The biggest breast on the world belongs to someone, but that fact by itself teaches us an uncomfortable truth about how easily we let outside definitions of biggest or best shape how we feel about ourselves. Think about how quickly you can spiral into comparison just by scrolling through your phone. You see someone with more followers, more success, more beauty, more recognition, and suddenly you feel smaller without anything in your life actually changing. That reaction doesn't come from reality, it comes from conditioning. For years you've been told that the measure of your worth is found in how you compare, and so when you see a headline about the biggest anything, your brain takes the bait. It doesn't stop to ask, does this matter to me? Does this improve my life? Does this align with my values? It jumps to comparison, and comparison is where confidence goes to die. You cannot build a meaningful life if you are constantly outsourcing your sense of self to someone else's highlight. The reason people obsess over extremes is because they think the extreme holds the answer, that if they could just be bigger, richer, more noticed, more followed, they would finally feel secure. But security doesn't come from being the biggest, it comes from being grounded. And the reason this matters so much is because every time you get distracted by someone else's extremes, you lose time and energy that could have been spent building your own. Instead of focusing on your goals, you're staring at theirs. Instead of investing in your growth, you're daydreaming about their outcome. Instead of showing up for your reality, you're fantasizing about theirs. That cycle is why so many people feel stuck. They are busy measuring instead of moving. They are watching instead of working. They are admiring instead of acting. And what's wild is that even the people with the biggest extremes often don't feel fulfilled. Someone might hold a record, someone might have the title, someone might be in the spotlight, but if they are not aligned with themselves, if they are not living authentically, that external validation does not fill the internal void. Which means chasing extremes is not the path to happiness, it's the path to exhaustion. The biggest thing you can ever do for yourself is not to win the comparisons but to step out of them entirely. Because when you stop asking, how do I measure up, and start asking, how do I want to live, that's when everything changes. The biggest breast on the world belongs to someone, but the real question is why do we care? Why do we fixate on extremes as if they hold the secret to life, when deep down we know they don't? The reason is simple. Extremes are distractions. They pull your attention away from your own life and place it on something that feels dramatic, exaggerated, or unusual, because your brain is wired to chase novelty. When something is extreme, it gives you the illusion that it matters more than it actually does. But here's the truth most people don't want to admit. The extremes that grab your attention are almost never the things that build a meaningful life. Think about it. What makes your day feel good isn't some headline about the biggest anything. What makes your day feel good is the small, consistent actions you take to care for yourself, to move your goals forward, to nurture your relationships. Those aren't flashy, they aren't extreme, they aren't going viral, but they are the foundation of real confidence. And yet people abandon those small actions every single day because they are distracted by the spectacle of extremes. They are chasing the biggest moment instead of building the daily ones. The obsession with extremes creates a dangerous cycle. The more you compare your life to someone else's headline, the less satisfied you become with your own progress. You start telling yourself you're behind, you're not enough, you're missing something. That belief eats away at your motivation until you stop trying altogether, because what's the point if you'll never be the biggest or the best? And yet the irony is that the people who actually make lasting impact in this world are almost never the ones chasing the biggest. They are the ones who stay consistent, the ones who keep showing up, the ones who choose alignment over attention. The biggest breast in the world belongs to someone, but that fact does not make them more worthy than you, it does not mean their life is better than yours, and it does not erase the importance of what you are capable of creating. When you understand that extremes are distractions, you stop giving them power over your mindset. You stop losing time comparing and start using that time to create. Because at the end of the day, your life will not be measured by the biggest thing you did but by the way you lived it, and that is something no headline can ever define for you.